Some lives end quietly, others through the most unexpected turns of events. From ordinary moments that took a dark turn to freakish mistakes, these deaths stun the mind. Each tale is a shocking twist no one could predict. Strange, tragic, sometimes unreal. Welcome to the world of the craziest accidental endings you'll never forget. In the stillness of a December morning in Lunenburg County, Virginia, a seasoned man took part in a pursuit that had shaped much of his life. Surrounded by the sound of dogs and the cool breath of winter, Lester C. Harvey Jr. stepped into the woods for a bear hunt. Something familiar, something he loved. Lester was 58, a father to 5 and a grandfather to 8. But to those who knew him, he was much more than that. He was a neighbor with a generous spirit, a friend to many, and a man who lived life outdoors, with boots caked in earth and stories carried on the wind. His hometown of Phoenix knew him well. There, he wasn't just respected, he was cherished. On that particular day, the hunt had led the group to a treed bear. It was a routine moment for houndsmen, the kind they had seen many times. One shot was fired. In the seconds that followed, what should have been the end of a hunt turned into the start of something far more tragic. The bear, struck by the bullet, fell from the tree. In an unimaginable turn of events, its weight landed directly on Lester. Emergency crews rushed him first to a local hospital, then to a major medical center in Richmond. For days, his family held on to hope. But on December 13th, just 4 days after the accident, he passed away from the injuries he had suffered. The authorities ruled it an accident. No charges were brought. But for his family and the community, the loss was heavy. His wife, April, shared heartfelt memories of the man she had loved for decades. His children spoke of a father whose presence was as strong as the land he walked. Friends remembered a man who greeted everyone with kindness, who made even strangers feel at home. On December 19th, mourners gathered at Mount Carmel Church to say their final goodbyes. The service was simple, but filled with emotion, a reflection of the life he lived. Quiet, strong, and meaningful. Lester didn't leave this world in silence. He left behind a trail, in memories, in stories, in love. It wasn't unusual to find Ethan outside, hands in the dirt, boots pressed into the ground he loved. That day in late January, he was doing what came naturally, helping out. Storms had knocked down trees near McGee Road, and cleanup was underway. He didn't hesitate. That's just who he was. The work wasn't glamorous, hauling limbs, clearing paths, but Ethan believed in pitching in. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there because someone needed to be. Then came the unexpected. One of the trees, massive and deeply rooted, had fallen during the storm, but underneath its roots were still holding tension. As crews worked nearby, the ground shifted. With a sudden, violent force, the root ball sprang upright, releasing years of pressure in an instant. Ethan was standing near it. The force of it trapped him beneath. Emergency responders arrived quickly. People did everything they could, but the injuries were too severe. Ethan's life was taken there, beneath the same open sky he grew up under, on the soil he hoped to spend a lifetime protecting. It was a shock that hit deep, not just because of how it happened, but because of who it happened to. Ethan was no stranger to hard work. He was studying wildlife biology at Clemson, chasing a future built around stewardship, of land, of life, of legacy. His dream wasn't fame. It was balance. Forests, fisheries, fields, all cared for with patience and pride. That's the path he was carving. In a quiet town nestled in the Bahia region of Brazil, a boy named Davi Nunees Morera lived what seemed like an ordinary life. Just 14 years old, full of energy and curiosity, he was like many teenagers, navigating school, family, and the digital world that increasingly shapes young minds. No one could have predicted how quickly things would take a devastating turn. One day in February 2025, Davi was rushed to a hospital after falling severely ill. Doctors worked tirelessly as his condition worsened. Vomiting, extreme pain in his leg, and confusion marked his final days. After nearly a week under medical care, Davi lost his battle. His death left a wave of silence over his community and a trail of unanswered questions behind. What emerged later was both shocking and heartbreaking. Investigators discovered that Davi had injected a strange mixture into his leg, a concoction reportedly made by crushing butterflies and mixing them with water. This bizarre act, some say, was fueled by an online trend. While authorities continue to investigate the full truth, the syringe found under his pillow suggested deliberate experimentation, likely done in secret. The news spread quickly, sparking outrage, sadness, and reflection. Parents, educators, and health experts began to speak out, urging vigilance and dialogue. How could a young life, so full of potential, be influenced into something so dangerous? Was it curiosity, peer pressure, or the powerful pull of digital platforms that led him there? Davi's final days were marked by unbearable pain. His mother recalls that he usually woke up with a smile, but that morning was different. His face was pale, his walk unsteady, and something in his eyes showed deep distress. At the hospital, doctors did everything they could, but the damage from the toxic mixture had already taken hold. The area where he had injected himself was swollen and rapidly worsening. By his last night, he was slipping in and out of consciousness, and before dawn, his heart gave out. His passing shattered his family's world. The room where he used to sketch and laugh now sits in silence. His clothes, his diary, his phone, they're all still there, but Davi is not. His mother held his head in her lap, whispering his name, waiting for a response that would never come. That silence was heavier than any words. June 12, 2025, began like any other for Sanjay Kapoor, marked by routine, discipline, and anticipation. That afternoon, he mounted his horse at the Guards Polo Club in Windsor, a place that had long been his refuge. Polo wasn't just a sport for him, it was a passion that brought him clarity beyond the boardroom. Clad in his gear, holding the mallet with the practiced ease of a seasoned rider, he seemed at ease, focused. Teammates and spectators watched as the match began, unaware that within minutes the field would fall into a hush no one expected. Midway through the game, Sanjay abruptly slowed down. Witnesses say he reached for his throat and gasped, "I've swallowed something." Those nearby heard urgency in his voice, but also confusion. His hand rose instinctively to his neck, as if trying to dislodge something lodged or stinging deep within. In the moments that followed, his posture changed. He swayed slightly, dismounted quickly, and staggered a few steps before collapsing on the grass. Panic set in. Medical staff rushed to his side. The game stopped. Players circled, shielding the scene. CPR was administered. Ambulances were called. But nothing reversed the rapid decline. The cause was sudden and violent. Early accounts pointed to a bee, perhaps swallowed, or one that stung him inside his throat. If that sting triggered a severe allergic reaction or obstructed his airway, there was little time to respond. Even with immediate intervention, the damage had been swift and unforgiving. By the time he reached the hospital, there was no sign of recovery. His heart had stopped. Doctors confirmed what bystanders feared but couldn't accept. The man who had arrived full of energy and resolve was no longer alive. He was 53. Those present described a surreal quiet that followed. The same ground that had echoed with galloping hooves now held a kind of stillness that made time feel suspended. His horse stood unmoving, as if sensing what words couldn't convey. The day closed not with celebration or victory, but with disbelief. A life of momentum ended not in ceremony, but in one irreversible instant, unexpected, raw, and final. In the world of true crime, some of the darkest horrors don't come from strangers in the night. They come from the house right next door. We think we know our neighbors, we wave at them, share fences, borrow sugar. But behind closed doors, some are hiding obsessions, grudges, and violent intentions. And sometimes the warning signs are so clear, it's almost as if the crime announces itself in advance. These are 3 chilling stories of people who didn't realize the greatest danger was living just a few feet away. Matthew Borman lived a peaceful life with his wife Sarah and their 3 young children in the quiet village of Walton, Cardiff, Gloucestershire. He was a devoted father, a kind man, and someone who got along with just about everyone, except one person. Their next-door neighbor, Can Arslan, had spent 12 years terrorizing the community. What began as petty disputes over parking quickly spiraled into a campaign of harassment and intimidation so extreme that neighbors lived in daily fear. Arslan filmed children's bedroom windows. He made graphic threats of sexual violence and death. He pretended to call hitmen, and the entire street reported him again and again. But despite police involvement, court orders, and even a recent harassment charge, no one stopped him. On October 5th, 2021, just one day after speaking to police and openly stating that he would kill Matthew Borman, Arslan did exactly that. He waited. He planned. And when Matthew returned home from work, Arslan ambushed him on the front lawn and stabbed him 27 times, in broad daylight. As Matthew lay on the ground, Arslan did something truly chilling. He sat on top of his victim's body and lit a cigarette. Matthew's wife, Sarah, rushed to help, but Arslan turned on her too, injuring her in the struggle. Peter Marsden, a retired civil servant who had also spoken out against Arslan's threats. Peter had warned authorities. He'd filed complaints, just like the others. But that didn't stop Arslan. The CCTV shows it clearly. As the camera rolls, we see Arslan, still holding the weapon, calmly crossing the street. There's no rush in his step, no panic, just cold, calculated intent. He walks directly toward the home of his next target, Peter Marsden, another neighbor who had dared to speak out. In an instant, Arslan charges. He forces his way through the doorway and begins his second attack. Peter is knocked back, caught completely off guard. What follows is a desperate struggle. Peter, despite being in his 60s and completely unarmed, fights back with everything he has. He was stabbed 8 times. In the chest, in the arm, but refuses to go down. And then, somehow, through sheer survival instinct, he breaks free. He escapes through a side door and runs. Meanwhile, Arslan steps back outside, as if nothing happened, calm, composed, completely disconnected from the horror he'd just unleashed. Almost immediately, an off-duty police officer, hearing the screams and chaos, runs toward the scene. Without hesitation, the officer confronts Arslan, who remains calm despite the blood on his clothes and hands. The officer lunges, tackling Arslan to the ground in a desperate attempt to stop him. A fierce struggle follows, but the officer manages to restrain Arslan and handcuff him, finally ending the terrifying spree of violence. Neighbors watch in shock, some still trembling from what they had just witnessed. It was clear this was no random attack, but the tragic conclusion to years of escalating fear and intimidation. In the aftermath, the community demanded answers. How had this been allowed to happen? Despite numerous complaints and legal actions spanning over a decade, nothing had stopped Arslan's campaign of harassment. At Bristol Crown Court, Arslan faced justice. The judge described him as highly dangerous, pointing out how Arslan's anger, resentment, and rage exploded into a spree of planned violence. He was sentenced to at least 37 years in prison for the murder of Matthew Borman and the brutal attacks on Sarah Borman and Peter Marsden. Throughout the trial, Sarah Borman's victim impact statement echoed the pain of a family shattered. She described how their lives had been torn apart by years of psychological torment, the constant fear, the sleepless nights, and the horror of witnessing her husband's murder. Arslan was also diagnosed with a paranoid, unstable, and antisocial personality disorder, yet refused treatment or therapy. The case sparked calls for serious investigations into how the police and other authorities had handled repeated warnings about Arslan's dangerous behavior. An independent inquiry was launched to examine the failures that allowed this tragedy to unfold. Shane Gilmer and his pregnant partner, Laura Sugdan, lived in Southburn, East Yorkshire, next to their neighbor Anthony Lawrence, 55. Their relationship was tense, marked by ongoing disputes and resentment. Shane Gilmer and Laura Sugdan's neighbor, Anthony Lawrence, had long been a source of tension. Their disputes ranged from arguments over noise to personal threats. At one point, Lawrence had threatened Shane with an axe after Shane complained about loud music. Despite attempts to keep peace, the hostility grew. Shane and Laura became increasingly concerned about Lawrence's behavior. When they reported his cannabis use to their letting agency, Citing the fumes were harming Laura's and her daughter's asthma, the situation deteriorated further. Shortly after this complaint, Lawrence was served with an eviction notice. Although there was no direct proof linking Shane and Laura to the eviction, Lawrence believed they were responsible and sought revenge. He escalated the feud by dumping horse manure on their lawn, a deliberate act meant to intimidate and insult. The neighbors' relationship became bitter and hostile. In January 2018, Lawrence planned a violent attack. He broke into Shane and Laura's home by removing bricks from the shared attic wall between the two properties. Quietly entering their loft, he hid there, waiting for his victims to return. After a night out, Shane and Laura came home, unaware of the deadly trap. Suddenly, Lawrence emerged and attacked with a crossbow, firing multiple bolts. Shane was struck repeatedly and died at the scene. Laura, who was 5 months pregnant, was seriously injured but managed to survive. The police investigation revealed that Lawrence had premeditated the attack, hiding in their loft with the weapon ready. His previous threats and violent tendencies were well documented. At trial, the evidence showed a clear pattern of harassment and escalating violence. Lawrence admitted the attack but showed no genuine remorse. He was convicted of murder and attempted murder, receiving a life sentence. Michael Wickham and Edgar Campos were neighbors in a Sydney suburb with a tense and troubled history. Over time, their relationship deteriorated, marked by frequent arguments and occasional threats. On May 6, 2020, the situation came to a head. CCTV footage captured Wickham approaching Campos's property in a visibly angry state. He confronted Campos aggressively and threw the first punch, sparking a violent altercation. Campos reacted by grabbing Wickham in a chokehold, attempting to restrain him. The hold lasted for over 2 minutes. During that time, Wickham initially struggled, fighting to break free. Eventually, he became unresponsive. Neighbors who witnessed the scene shouted for Campos to release Wickham, fearing for his life, but Campos maintained the hold until emergency services arrived. Sadly, Wickham was declared dead at the scene. Edgar Campos was arrested and charged with manslaughter. His defense argued he acted in self-defense, stating that Wickham had initiated the attack. However, the court noted that the chokehold was a deadly use of force and lasted too long. In 2021, Campos pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received a prison sentence of 5 years.